better intro myself. I think I'm going to have to package that one up and have you do that for me all the time. So I'm going to hopefully get our slides going here, Bobby. Let me make sure I've got this right. Okay, so welcome everybody, and to our session today, as Bobby said, on virtual training or on VILTs. It's called different things, synchronous training, whatever you want to call it. The aspect I wanted to talk to you about today was really preparation, and how preparation is key to your successful virtual training event. So we've already done introductions, as Bobby said. My name is Margaret Uhrich. I'll be with you for the next 15 minutes or so, and I am a graduate of the ITM program, a very proud graduate of the ITM program. And since graduating, I know Bobby's given me some highlights, but really have decided to focus on virtual training. Of all the things I learned in the ITM program and of all the things I was exposed to, it's the virtual training that really resonates with me. So since earning my graduate degree, I've also received some certifications in facilitating in the synchronous environment, in producing in the synchronous environment, and then also in designing for the synchronous environment. So it's been an exciting ride so far, and I'm really looking forward to the future and really what the future is going to hold for us with virtual training. Oops, click twice, sorry about that. So today during the session, I'm not sure how many of you are new to the Wimba tool. This may be your first time, and based on what Bobby just said, it sounds like if you're attending these sessions, it will probably be or maybe your last time in Wimba. But let's just quickly go over how you can interact with me today during this session. So we're going to use the status symbol, which you can find if you look to the bottom right, you'll see the whole list of attendees, and there's a darker gray bar underneath the names. And to the very left, you have a check mark, and next to that, you have an X. So I may, throughout this session, ask you to give me a check mark if you agree with me, or give me an X if you disagree. Now, I may refer to them as a green check and a red X, because in several environments that I work in, that is how they are handled. Here, they're all just the same color, but you'll know what I mean if I say green check or red X. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask everyone just to quickly give me the check or the X. Let me know that you can find them and you know what I'm talking about. Awesome, very good. Okay, most of you seem to be comfortable with finding the check. Interestingly enough, it does appear as a green check after it's been pressed by the participant, so that's good. All right, we've got a red X. Bruce, thanks for being different there. That's awesome. Okay, great. So that's one way to just provide some feedback, and I'll be using that throughout the session today. And the other is with the chat, and it appears as though most people have already entered some stuff in the chat, so that's great. But if you're not sure where that is, just look to the bottom left of your corner, and you'll notice that you have the ability to enter something in chat. Now, what I wanted to point out is that, oops, just get used to this tool here. You can, by clicking down in the bottom left corner, you can select to send your message to anybody. So you can also send a private chat. If you're sending a chat message that you want to be seen or heard, technically by everybody, please make sure that you're entering it and sending it to the main chat here. Okay? Now, I know at the beginning of the session, while we were waiting to get started, Bobby asked everyone to enter into the chat where you were checking in from. So I did get a chance to scroll through that. I would like to get to know you, though, a little bit better. So if you wouldn't mind, go back to that chat for me, enter into chat your name and the role within the your role within your organization. So using chat, I want to know your name and your role within your organization. A lot of instructional designers, learning consultants, PM, okay. Shirley Whitfield, I recognize that name. How are you doing?
Hi, Margaret.
Hi. Thanks for joining us today. So this is great. We have a large representation from the training industry. Wonderful. Okay, next question that I have for you. Take a moment and tell me in chat what you would say your experience with virtual training is. So if you're new to virtual training, you can just enter new into the chat area. If you've done it for a period of time, just let me know what that is. Has it been a couple months? Is it a year? So what's your experience level with virtual training? Some people that haven't done it, we've got some people with several years. Okay, great. So throughout the session today, I've noticed we already have a very active chat even before I started asking you those questions. So those of you like PJ who's got more than 10 years here, please feel free if when I'm discussing something, if you can add to that, if you have some relevant experience that you want to, put in the chat, feel free to do that. It'll help us all just learn this better and maybe walk away with even more information than I was prepared to share with you. Okay, so good old Ben Franklin and this quote that we've probably heard multiple times. By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. Give me a show of hands if you've heard that one before. And the raise hand function is right next to the X. Okay, great. Yeah, we've all heard it, right? I mean, it sounds familiar. It's been said to us at some point, be it in school, by one of our parents possibly, maybe by our employer. We hear it, and yet I would hazard to guess or bet that at some point all of us probably didn't prepare to the point that we really should have. I mean, we know we should, but we're probably not always preparing to the level that we should. And in virtual training, it is something that you really need to do. You need to give it the time to ensure that you're going to have a successful event. So when we talk about preparation as it relates to the virtual environment, I've identified 5 areas where I really think you have the opportunity for preparation, and preparation that's going to make a difference within your session. So those areas that we're going to look at today are technology, objectives, your audience, your facilitator, and your materials. Okay, so let's start with technology, and let's talk about the tool that you're going to be using. So I realize that many of you, if you're within an organization that's been doing virtual training for a little while, maybe already have your tool, and you don't have a choice around that. But for those of you that have the opportunity to select a tool, you've got many that you can possibly be selecting from. Well, maybe many is not the right word, but you have. There's the selection out there, and I would hazard to guess that there's going to be more developing. So I know, Bobby talked to us about Blackboard and how Wimba is going away. Blackboard, though, I don't think is going to. I think in the educational area, Blackboard's entrenched, and I've seen some clients that I've worked with recently, big clients, that are switching from some of the other major players and are going back to Blackboard or are switching to Blackboard for the first time. So they're likely to be a player in the training market. You also have Adobe Connect, you have GoToTraining, and you have Cisco WebEx. Now, for some of these tools, you have more than one option. So if your organization is a WebEx organization, let's say, you still might have a choice around what tool you're going to use. If you have the license for all 3, WebEx has WebEx Meeting, they have Training Center, and they have Event Center. So there's some preparation required there, some thought that needs to be given around what is it you're going to be doing with this event and which one's the appropriate room for you to use or the virtual environment for you to select. GoToTraining also has a GoToMeeting product. That might be perfectly accessible for the goals of the event that you're putting on. So even though you already do have a tool, there might still be some decisions that you need to make. So some thought that needs to be given to it ahead of time. All right, once you've made that decision and you've got your tool, either you've made the choice or it's been designated for you, you need to understand its capabilities and limitations. And this seems a little simplistic, but I will tell you, even today, now I've been doing virtual training for a couple of years now. I had delivered presentations in the Wimba environment. It was going back to when I was in school with the ITM program. But I forgot about its functionality, and I actually did not realize that that the builds or the animations that I created in my PowerPoint presentation would not play in this environment. So last night, I was in there redoing my PowerPoint deck so that I, actually just created additional slides so that it appeared as though I was creating a build. So that's the type of preparation that needs to get done. You need to understand what's going on with your tool, what are its capabilities, what are its limitations, and then what do you need to do with that so that you can have the type of session you want to have. I mean, I could have left my slides the way they were, and then everything would have just come in at once, and you would have seen all of my bullets. But that wasn't how I wanted to deliver this presentation today. So I needed to make adjustments. So I guess my message there is if you're new to the product, absolutely key to learn the capabilities and limitations. You need to before you can even design for that environment or deliver in that environment. But even if it's a tool that you're familiar with and you've been using for a period of time, it's good to always check in with that tool to make sure it can do what you are trying to do for this particular session that you are about to create. All right, and the other thing here, and this is something most people might not think about, and I think it's one of those things that until it kind of comes up from behind and bites you in the butt, you might not give it too much thought. But it's important to really understand your licensing agreement around your tool. So what has your organization purchased? Meaning, with the platform that you're using, you have limitations around the number of people that you're able to put into a meeting room. So give me a green check, or excuse me, a check if you are aware of the licensing agreement for the platform that you're using and you understand what your limitations are for the number of participants you're allowed to have in a room. Give me a check if you are, and give me an X if that's a thought that's never really crossed your mind. So Bobby's admitting it's never crossed her mind. Okay, some people. So I'm not seeing too many checks here. Let me scroll down. Maybe I'm missing some. All right, I've got a good mix. So here, let me just tell you a quick story, and then maybe this will help you think about this for the future. I was actually working with a client who was putting on an event. Actually, I have two stories. Working with a client who was putting on an event, and it was to be done. It was a panel of experts that had been invited to the session, and scheduled or registered for this event were, I believe, 125 people. And it was an event that was definitely very popular. The person organizing it knew that she was going to have a good turnout. She actually borrowed somebody else's room. It was somebody kind of sponsored this event for her, gave them access to their virtual platform. So it was registered under that virtual platform. You know, the day of the event, we had a couple of our, the panel of experts were in the room. Some of our participants were joining. And at 25, we stopped getting any more participants in the room. And we were missing one of our speakers. And then a person who was monitoring email for us around this event started getting email messages that they were trying to get in the room and they were being told that they were blocked access to the room. Well, unbeknownst to us and unbeknownst to the person that lent us their virtual platform to use, there was a cap on this particular room of 25 people. So we had an event with over 100 people registered, and we could only get 25 in the room. And one of the people that was not in the room was one of our speakers. So had we known that ahead of time, we could have adjusted. We would have found a different platform. The person that was sponsoring us maybe would have been able to give us access to a different room that they had access to. But we didn't know about it ahead of time. So there was nothing we could do at that moment. We hosted the event, and then we sent the recordings out. It was plan B, but it wasn't what we wanted it to be. And then I had the situation with another client who was putting on an event for over 500 people. And fortunately, they realized it about 3 weeks prior. So they were able to make adjustments, and they sent out all new invitations with the URL for an all new meeting room that would hold the estimated 500 people that were to attend. So it seems simple. And for those of you that have been working in the virtual training for several years now, if you've never given that one a thought, I'd say at least check into that. It may not have been a problem for you yet, but as your organization grows with the virtual training, you might find that that's something you might run into. Okay, so before I go on to objectives, does anybody have any questions with regards to technology? If so, feel free to enter it into chat. Oh, Bobby, I see you shared your story, and it's costing you dinner. Wow, that's interesting. I'm sure they're not upset about the dinners that you're purchasing for them. All right, awesome. I'm not seeing any questions, and I do have Bobby that's monitoring the chat here for us. She's acting as our producer for today's session, and we will talk about that in a couple minutes. So if there's any other questions, Bobby can field them or draw my attention to them at the end. And we are going to have time for Q&A at the end, so feel free, if I don't catch something in chat, we can bring it up at the end. All right, so let's talk about objectives and your areas for preparation as it relates to your objectives. Oh, all right, our forward button here is a little sensitive. Okay, so objectives, what are they? We know with any training, and if there's one thing I've learned, or I learned in my ITM class, and especially in my class where Bobby was my instructor, that your objectives are king. You really need to nail down your objectives, and then you need to design to your objectives. So it's no different in a virtual training event, and I don't imagine that surprises any of you. Really, the question is, what are my objectives? What is it that I'm trying to do? And then how am I going to meet and how am I going to measure those objectives in the virtual platform? So throughout today's presentation, I'm going to make the assumption quite often that you're converting something that you had done face-to-face, because that seems to be a common practice right now. So organizations who are adopting virtual training are first really converting over the courses that they've delivered face-to-face. I have seen some organizations that are actually taking e-learning courses and converting them into a virtual environment. But primarily you have it where you're converting something that was delivered face-to-face. And then, of course, there are those courses that you're going to deliver or that you're going to create from scratch to be done for the very first time in the virtual environment. But if it is something that had been delivered face-to-face prior, you could probably take, for the most part, I would say, it's a safe bet that the objectives that you have, you can probably bring over into the virtual environment as they are, with some exceptions, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But how you're going to meet those objectives and how you're going to measure those objectives, that's where you might have to make some changes. So it might require that you're going to have to create different exercises for the virtual environment. It might require that you create different instructions for how to complete those exercises now that you're going to do them in the virtual environment. You might look at your objectives and realize that you, in order to do it in a virtual environment, need to bring in a subject matter expert, for a period of time during that session. So there are some things that you just are probably more than likely going to need to change with regards to meeting your objectives. Now, the concept of measuring objectives is really interesting, and getting back to your objectives coming from your face-to-face training class and being able to roll over into the virtual environment. For the most part, they will be able to, and the key is, and how you will know if you can do that, is if you can find a way to measure them in your virtual environment. So if you're going to deliver this training and your objectives that you have set for this training, if you can find a way to measure those objectives virtually, then you can deliver that objective. You can meet that objective within a virtual session. Again, like I said, you're just probably going to need to adjust how you meet them and probably adjust how you measure them.
Margaret, quick question. Yes. Patty has a question here in the chat.
Okay.
How do you feel about letting participants use a microphone?
Oh, wow. I love it personally. And we're going to talk about the audience and preparation around the audience. And one of the things we're going to talk about is size. So I think it really depends on how many people you have in the session. But I love to give my audience a voice, and I think it really is the best way to create that engagement that you're always looking for within a virtual environment. Some platforms allow you the control to give out the rights for audio and take them back. So at a minimum, I always like when people have a question, if possible, to have them use the audio to ask their question. That's for a larger group. And then for smaller groups, if you're dealing with, under 12, and everyone is going to be responsible with muting themselves when they're not speaking, then I would keep the phone lines open and just ask everyone to please mute as, when they're not speaking.
We have another question here from Bill. Can you give an example of how to measure an objective while conducting a virtual training session?
Okay. Well, sure, you could. It really depends. And Bill, if you want to throw out an objective that you're thinking of, and then we could brainstorm together what type of measurement you could come up with. But if you're doing a session on having a coaching conversation, and you want your participant as an objective to be able to demonstrate an appropriate way to have a coaching conversation with an employee, then you could put them on camera with you, and you could role play and have them go through the process of that conversation. What are the steps they're going to take in that coaching conversation? You could let them play the manager and you play the employee. That would be one way to measure that. This is one of the things that I think is most fun about virtual training, is trying to figure out how to make it work. And for a lot of things, you really can find ways. Now, if you're teaching someone how to bake a cake, I think there's aspects of that you can do online, that you can do virtually. Maybe the part about talking about the ingredients that you're going to pick and how you pick the right ingredients, and maybe even some topic about or around measuring and that type of thing. But when it comes to actually baking the cake, you can't really measure that online. So you'd have to figure out another way to handle that objective, and maybe that's something you have to do face-to-face in a lab of some sort. Does that make sense? Okay, good. I see that you've commented that it does. Great. So again, at the end of the session, if anybody has questions like that, and if there's time, I would love to brainstorm with everybody around that, and maybe we can open up the phone lines even. Okay, so if there are any questions regarding the objectives, put them in chat now, or like I said, just hold until the end and we'll cover everything then. So the next area to talk about really is as it relates to your audience, and where can you prepare with regards to your audience. All right, so first you want to know, who are they? And that, again, is with any training, and that's that learner analysis that you do. You want to know who's going to be in your audience, who's taking this training, who are you designing it for, what is their level of experience, all those same things that you would want to know if you're creating an e-learning or if you're creating this for stand-up. But what you also need to know is, where are they connecting from? Something you don't really much have to worry about when you're doing face-to-face training or e-learning. Can anyone tell me why it's important to understand where your audience is connecting from? Enter it into chat if you think you know where I'm going with this one. Connection speed, exactly. Distractions, global concerns, time zones, bandwidth. You guys are nailing it. You absolutely want to know what's going on. Bandwidth will bring down a training session, or I should say poor bandwidth will bring down your training session quicker than you would like, that's for sure. Bandwidth concerns are going to prevent your audience from keeping up with you. There's going to, that delay is going to be problematic. I mean, bottom line, a bandwidth issue is going to create, or is going to prevent your employees or your participants from really being engaged in your session. And the minute you lose them, the minute they feel like they're not keeping up, that they're not seeing what you're talking about, the minute they feel disconnected, they're going to disconnect. They might stay in your room, but they're not going to be participating with you. So bandwidth is really an issue, and you want to understand, if you're a global organization and you know you have people that are going to be calling in from other areas, what is the bandwidth that's available, and then design to that level. One of the things, if you know bandwidth is going to be a concern that you're going to not do or avoid doing as much as possible, is screen sharing. Screen sharing is very bandwidth intensive. So you might decide, if you know you're going to have people calling in from an area where bandwidth is an issue, you'll take screenshots instead and show the screenshots. Another thing that you're going to want to avoid is showing video. Another really, bandwidth intensive feature that you just, if you know ahead of time, you can avoid and you can make alternative plans. Somebody else said time zone, that's really, key. Sometimes you can't avoid when you have to schedule a session, but if you know where your people are calling from, maybe you hold multiple sessions. Maybe you have one that's going to work for your group in the Americas, and one for EMEA, and then one for Asia Pac. So just things to think about, and if you address them ahead of time, you can be prepared and you can help to make this a success. Okay, so we talked about audience and how many you should allow into a session, and this is the conversation that I really like to have with people. So first I'm going to ask people to just, those of you that have been doing virtual training or that are with an organization who has been doing a lot of virtual training, do you know where you max your training out at? What's the max number of participants that you will let into a session? Enter that into chat for me. All right, so Sarah says 30, Michelle's got 14, 20, 15. Wow, 75, that's a lot. Okay. Nicole's got us at 200. Okay. Licensing requires less than 25. Okay, yes, depends on what's being delivered. Chris, that's an awesome point. Patricia, same with you, depends on the topic. Keith says 50. Okay, absolutely. So some of you are right on target for a training event, and some of you, the numbers you're throwing out there would be fine for a webinar. And we're not really talking about that a whole lot during this session, but we'll spend a moment on that right now. To me, a webinar is just when you have somebody delivering information one way and you aren't interested really in creating interactivity. You don't necessarily worry about participation. You just have a message that you want to deliver, and you're delivering that information. You have the president of the organization that wants to deliver, a State of the Union address, so to speak. Then you can put 200 people, in a room. Then you can put 500 people in a room. That's fine. But if you are trying to put on a training event where you want your participants to be engaged, you want them to be interactive, you want to have exercises and breakout rooms, you want to allow audio, you want role playing, whatever it might be. When you have objectives that you want to have met and measured, you really want to think about the number of people you let in a room. Now, I would say ideally my recommendation is 12. And I know that sounds low, and I meet resistance with that with the organizations that I'm working with. And it seems that it's not practical. When it is practical and when you can do it, it's the ideal for sure. Somebody had there at 30. That can get to be a lot. Some organizations that I've talked to will tell me, well, they set it at 30 because they know they always have some people that don't show up. And that's true. You will have some, if you're an organization where it's always likely that you're going to have about a 50% rate for showing up, or if it's not a required training, then you're going to have people that, are no-shows. Then maybe you do set it at 30 and know that you're going to probably average between 15 to 20. It's hard to know, but like I said, I think 12 is a really good number. Now, I've had people say to me, well, if you do 12 and you only have 6 show up, I would say that's awesome still. I think the lower the numbers, the better for a training event. I have been producing with one client for several months now, so I've seen their same program over and over again. And I've seen it done well with 20. I've seen it done really well with 6. So it can be done with the larger numbers, but I would not be afraid of the smaller numbers at all. I would be concerned if you start getting over 24 and over 30, I think also gets to be limiting. So it's just something to think about. But again, as other people have listed here in the chat, it does really depend on what you're doing. What is your objective for this training session? What is it you hope to achieve? It's an area where you need to give it some thought. Absolutely. And I think each and every time you should give it some thought rather than have it set up as a standard, like a default. We always say 25 in this room. I think some sessions you might want to make a decision where you only have 15 or 12 or 10. Other sessions you might allow 50. So just something to think about. And Barb, you're right. If you're a single presenter, it can be tough to manage over 25. And we talk about that also a little bit further in the presentation. Hey, I agree. I think it's tough to convince people, that the ROI for smaller training is worthwhile. But I think, it would be worth the effort, and probably the only way to do that would be in test results and surveys, and then in maybe doing that, checking in with them in 30 days. Have you changed the behavior that you were hoping to change? If you're looking to adopt virtual training within your organization, if you're looking to have it accepted, I've talked with, as Bobby said, I'm here at Cisco today, and I'm here observing training that's being delivered face-to-face because they wanted to convert it to a virtual session. So I've been talking to the participants, and they think it's going to be more engaging live than it can be in a virtual environment. So if you're an organization that's making a move to virtual and you're trying to get it adopted and accepted by your employees, then I would absolutely go in with lower numbers to start, and then maybe after people get used to it, then build up to larger numbers. If it's really important that you be able to get more people into a session for financial reasons or just logistics, whatever it might be, start small and then build into that after people are comfortable and after they would be free to be active in chat regardless of how many people, and if they don't need their hand held so much by the facilitator. Okay. So keep the comments coming in chat. I'm scrolling through them as I can, and Bobby, like I said, is monitoring them as well. So the last thing to think about here just with your audience is what do they need to participate. So in order to have them be successful in your session, what is it they need? Do they need a participant guide? And we talk about that again a little bit later. Do they need instructions? Do they need links? Do they need anything sent to them ahead of the session? Is there pre-work that they need to do? What is that information that they're going to need so that they can participate, fully participate? And I should put that word on this slide, fully participate in your session. Okay, so we've talked about technology, we've talked about objectives, we've talked about the audience. Let's talk about the facilitator. Then we'll move to materials, and then we'll definitely should have time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so with your facilitator, here are the 4 areas where I believe you have opportunities to prepare ahead of time. So first, it's asking yourself, what is the experience level of your facilitator? Have they done this before? Are they new to virtual training? If so, what do you need to do to help them get up to speed? I just worked with a client a couple weeks ago who is adopting a virtual platform for their sales team within their organization, and they wanted to do a whole day session, something that they would have done live, and now they were converting it to being done virtually. They had 7 different presenters. None of them had delivered virtually before. It was 37 hours of my time to work with those 7 facilitators to get them up to speed and to work with them to convert their PowerPoint presentation so that it was acceptable to be delivered virtually. So there's a lot of time that can be involved. The good news is one of those things that once you train them on how to do it once or twice, that eventually they'll get it and you won't need to invest that time each and every time. But if you're dealing with a new facilitator, again, hello? Okay. Bobby, if you can't hear me, let me know.
No, you're good. We had a lot of background noise coming in, so I just muted I just disabled the audio, and then we'll open it up when you're finished.
Oh, awesome, perfect. Okay, good. So anyway, what I was saying, so with regards to your facilitator, get them trained. If you have a facilitator who's not comfortable with your environment or not comfortable delivering in the virtual environment, that will derail your training session, again, as quickly as bad bandwidth will derail your session. And there's 2 areas that you need to look at with your facilitator. Are they experienced in delivering in the virtual environment, and are they experienced with the platform? They may have done virtual training before, but they were maybe on a different platform. Or maybe you've just switched to a different platform within your organization, and now you have to retrain all of your facilitators. So just something you need to acknowledge, and I would do it each and every time with every facilitator. Where are they at with their experience? What support do they need? Also, just like with your audience, you need to know where's your facilitator calling in from. What type of bandwidth concerns might they have? Are they connected to a hard line? Do they have the ability to connect to a hard line? Nowadays, as Bobby mentioned, you can connect and facilitate from an iPad, other devices as well. I know, I'm not sure which ones you can actually facilitate from, but you can join from multiple devices. But definitely, I know Adobe Connect has an app that will allow you almost all facilitator privileges from your iPad. So just need to know if you have a facilitator that's going to be doing that because they're traveling or whatever, and that's their only option. What type of support do you need to give them around that? So again, it seems like it's maybe something kind of basic, but I think each and every time you're hosting a virtual event, you at least want to ask yourself that question and make sure you know the answer and that you've got all bases covered. Also, with the facilitator, do they need any tools? Do they have a headset with microphone? As you can see in this picture, we have our facilitator there, using a headset and microphone. Absolutely a best practice. Are they going to be screen sharing in this presentation? And if so, do they need the software downloaded on their computer? Are they set up to be able to do that? Do they have the facilitator guide that they might need? Do they have the materials that the participant's going to have? Do they know what they are? What is it that your facilitator needs in order to be able to successfully deliver this training? And then the last point here is support, and then I told you I was going to mention that. Bobby, as I mentioned in today's session, is acting as our producer. It is the best practice for all training events to use a producer. Now, I label them as a producer. You can call it a co-facilitator. You could just call that person that's in the room helping you out. You don't want to be in a session by yourself. It's very difficult to manage a session, to deliver training and manage the technology at the same time. It can be done, and with the smaller groups, it's easier because you have less people to manage, and maybe that's the ROI that you're looking for. I think it was Sarah that mentioned that. If you keep your group small, then you could probably justify just having one person in the room doing the delivery. But if you get into larger numbers, you really need to have somebody helping you with that. You need to have that producer. And I see Grant mentioned dry run is an excellent idea. Absolutely. And, if we were talking best practices here, that would absolutely be on the list. You always want to do a dry run. Bobby and I did a dry run yesterday, and that dry run I did from the exact same spot I'm sitting today with the exact same connection that I'm using. So great point. Thanks, Grant.
Margaret, Cheryl has a quick question here. Somehow
Sure.
It got by me, but how do you get the customer to accept virtual training?
Well, that's a really big question. That's a loaded question, and I'm sure I can do 100% justice right here, Cheryl. I think it's about showing the benefits of it. And I will be honest, and Bobby can contest this, we were actually talking yesterday. I think for most organizations, really what's going to be most appropriate is a blended solution. So you're not doing away with your e-learning. You may not be doing away with face-to-face training if you're currently doing that. But what you're adding to the mix is the virtual training. Because some of what you do live, a lot of what you can do live now, you can move to virtual and therefore save that money, save that travel time, that expense of doing it face-to-face. And some of what you were doing as e-learning also can be done cheaper as a virtual training program. I mean, we're talking about the preparation here. And let me tell you, there is time involved. You don't just, log into Wimba or WebEx or Connect and throw up a PowerPoint presentation and do a successful training. There's definitely time that you need to invest. But I would bet if you looked at it from a dollars and cents standpoint, what you can do virtually is maybe going to be cheaper than what you can do with creating e-learning. Now, e-learning, I know you create it once and then you can deploy it over and over and over again until it becomes outdated, and then you have to recreate it. So I guess the easiest answer is it comes down to money and what's going to help your learners learn the best. I think the virtual environment allows for that interaction with a facilitator that can allow for that higher level of learning. So I'm not sure I've answered your question the best, but hopefully that helps. All right, so there we go. So now let's just talk about materials, and then we have like 12 minutes left, so we'll have the materials conversation real quick, and then we can open it up for some Q&A. All right, so with regards to materials, kind of seems like a no-brainer, right? For the most part, anybody that's been in a virtual environment, whether they've trained in it or attended something in a virtual environment, for the most part, it's always PowerPoint-based. Some platforms do allow you to upload a PDF, and you can train off of the PDF document. So you've got your PowerPoint. However, like I said before, you cannot take your PowerPoint that you use to deliver your face-to-face training or the PowerPoint that you created to then have wrapped or have converted into Articulate or Presenter so that it can be an e-learning course. You can't take that presentation, upload it into a platform, and think you're good to go. So it's having a slide deck that's appropriate for the virtual environment. And that's a whole other training session just on how to really build your material so that they're appropriate for the environment. But it's all in the graphics that you use, the content that you put on the page or on the slide, or the content that you don't put on the slide. You know, what do you want to provide and what don't you want to provide on the slide? So absolutely something that you need to think about, and it takes time to convert a slide deck. I think starting from scratch might be a little bit easier, but if you are rolling over or converting, absolutely factor in some time to convert that PowerPoint presentation. All right, you also need a facilitator guide, and more than likely, if your organization does stand-up training, you're probably used to developing guides. I would say that the guide you're going to use for the virtual environment is going to be different. Yes, you're still going to probably have your thumbnails of your slide deck, but you're also going to have your facilitator column that's going to have speaking points for your facilitator. It also might have action items for your facilitator as it relates to the platform itself. And then probably the biggest differentiator in your facilitator guide are going to be those producer notes. Now, whether you can use a producer or not in your session, I would put comments in the producer column that are specific to the technology. Something like launch this poll, or switch to this layout, or set up the breakout. Again, if you're doing those types of things in a session, ideally you have a producer with you, but if you're not, at least your facilitator guide is organized so that those types of instructions are in a specific area, and I think it will help you as a facilitator to manage your session.
Margaret, we have a question here in chat from Helen. Why wouldn't a PowerPoint that you use live work for a virtual training? That is, assuming you have a decent PowerPoint for a live presentation, which a lot of people don't.
Well, I am assuming that most people don't, and what I have seen, most people don't. So we're on the same page there, Helen. If your PowerPoint presentation was developed according to books like Presentation Zen, if you're putting limited number of words on the slide, if you're using graphics, if you're keeping them clean, using a lot of white space, then it should be fine. But what you need to add to it, so maybe you're not changing what's there currently because the slides themselves are okay, but now what you need to add are those instruction slides as it relates to the room. You know, how do you interact in this session? You need to put placeholders in for your polls and your quizzes. You need to put in instructions for your activities. So it's those types of things that you need to add to your slide deck. Does that make sense, Helen? Yeah, Helen, I would say a good presentation equals a good presentation. But, as you said, I think there are not many good presentations out there, so I would always, if you yourself didn't create the slide deck, I would absolutely review whatever's been handed to you to convert to make sure that it is a good presentation. Okay, so we discussed the facilitator's guide. You also need your participant guide. We talked about that. But what do you want to put in this participant guide? I would say this should also have the thumbnails of the slide deck. And then, ideally, it just has lines for them to write information because you want them engaging. So one way to engage with your session is to be taking notes, to be engaging with the content. If you have them do independent work during the session, you should put your instructions for that independent work in their facilitator guide. Any handouts that you make available to them, you could also make available in the participant guide. Or a list of references, a list of resources, all can go in their participant guide. But again, every session, especially as it relates to the participant guide, may be a little bit different, so every guide might be a little bit different. Absolutely, you could use a template to start for both your facilitator guide and your participant guide, but then as it builds, as it develops, is really going to be dependent upon those objectives that we talked about. What are you hoping to achieve? What do you need to do to achieve them? All right, so polls and tests. Just quickly here, some platforms allow you to create allows you to launch polls and tests. And those that do often then also allow you to create them ahead of time. So I consider those to be materials because you can do them ahead of time. With WebEx, you actually have a quiz maker, like an app, that you can do it ahead of time, and then you upload that. So it sits on your hard drive, and then you upload it into the room. With Adobe Connect, you actually get into your room ahead of time, and you can create the poll ahead of time that way. GoToTraining also has the ability to create them ahead of time, and then they're stored in the library, and you can select them for your particular event. So absolutely, I say using polls and tests within the session are great to do. What's not great is thinking that you can do them on the fly. So there's absolutely some preparation around that.
We have a quick question here from Sarah Meggs. How do you feel about having participants go outside the virtual classroom to another application to practice, for systems training as an example?
Oh, I think it's a fine idea if you build the right instructions, if you set clear boundaries. So if you give them clear directions on where they're going, what they're going to do when they get there, how long they have, and if you have a way of communicating with them to let them know to come back. So I've seen it done. I've actually designed it. I think it can work really well. The key for any of that type of stuff is really in the instructions that you provide. And so when they leave your session, what is it that you have on the screen when they've left the session? So that if they need to come back to get instructions or whatever, they can go back into your session, and on, in the main stage there are the instructions for what they need to do. I would also build all of those instructions into their participant guide. The last thing you want is a learner out there on their own floundering because you've lost them, they won't do what you wanted them to do, and they may not come back. So what is it they need to have in order to be successful? It usually comes down to, good instruction. Okay, let's keep going because I think I'm almost done here. Last, we have is videos. Again, if you're going to use videos, if bandwidth isn't an issue, if you know you're going to have the appropriate level of bandwidth and you want to use videos, then have them prepared ahead of time. Have them preloaded if you can do that. If you can't do that, at least practice in your dry run, launching that video, make sure that works. So definitely with videos, because, if they work, it's great. If they don't, it's ugh. So definitely an area you want to be prepared around. Okay, so we've covered all the areas that I wanted to cover with you. We've got our technology, our objectives. We talked about the audience, your facilitator, and your materials. So let's open it up for Q&A, and I know they've been coming in throughout, and I know there's probably some in the chat here, so I'll scroll through the chat, and feel free, Bobby, if you think we can open the lines, I'm all for doing that, and then we can just have individuals raise their hand, and we can call on them. So if anybody has a question, feel free to either feel free to keep entering into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand. So Nelia, I see you have a question.
Yeah, Nelia, what is the difference between handouts and participant guides? And we missed one a little earlier about distribution of participant guides when people don't have printers.
Okay, so let's answer the first question, the difference between a participant guide and a handout. I would say that for the most part, you would want to put everything into your participant guide if you can. But a handout to me is that white paper maybe that was written by an expert that you think is going to benefit the course, or any extra resource. And some platforms allow you to throw up those handouts, in the middle of the session, kind of on the fly. But if you've identified it ahead of time that this is a resource you want them to have access to, or it's an article you want them to read, or like I said, a white paper, or maybe it's a marketing brochure by your company that you want them to see, then, how are you going to get that to them? How are you going to make sure they have that so that they can use it within the session? Certain things, PDFs, that type of thing, you could incorporate into the participant guide, but not all of it. I mean, some of it might be links to websites that you want them to go visit. So in some cases, maybe there is no difference. In other cases, I think there absolutely could be, and that's why I just wanted to point it out. All right, and Bobby, what was the other question? Oh, handing out participant guides. I like it when, I have found it works great when you can have an individual download the materials at the time they've registered for an event. And I would say if you want them to download it and you want them to have it in front of them, then absolutely you need to make it available at that time, and that's still no guarantee that everybody's going to get it. The other thing to think about is just to keep it as short as possible so that they're not, so that you don't have all of your employees downloading 50, 60, 70 pages each and every time they join this session. The organizations that make, or the platforms that make it available on the fly, they can download it when they enter the room, and then we'll just have to work on it on their platform. So that does make it a little more difficult to take notes, but certainly for breakout sessions, those types of things where they're leaving the environment anyway, then they would be able to minimize the environment and open up the Word doc or the PDF, whatever it might be that you created for this participant guide. I think if you are in a position where you believe that most of your participants have not downloaded the material, and yet there's information there that you want to make sure they take notes on, then you just pause and you say, I just gave you a lot of information. I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes here to just jot down whatever notes you might want to jot down. And that will give them the time to, minimize the platform, bring up the Word doc, and enter any notes they might want to enter. Any other questions?
All right, folks. We're gonna wrap it up here. Margaret will be here for a little while. I'll be here for a little while. We'll keep the chat open and the audio going. But we do like to end at 1 o'clock because, as you've seen, we have people already rushing off to meetings. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Let's have a big round of applause for Margaret. Great job. Absolutely great job on this. Lots of really good information. And the whole concept that, that you have to be prepared for this is just right on, right on. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Don't forget to join us in May. Again, if you want to be on that panel discussion, shoot me an email, baggio@lasalle.edu, and we'll be around for some questions, comments for, 5-10 minutes here. Anybody have any questions for us? Yeah, it was informative. It was wonderful, and it's very timely. A lot of people jump into this and they think it's easy. And unfortunately, if it's going to be good, it's not always easy.
Absolutely. I can't believe it was 1 o'clock already. Boy, I just felt like I got on a roll. So if anybody's still here, I've got more.
All right, Nelia has a question for you, Margaret. Margaret, I'm new to ID after 10 plus years in teaching. Could I talk with you in an info interview to explore the field more? There you
Absolutely.
go.
Amelia, let me just do this because I realized, I kind of got the hook there, so I didn't get to finish going through my slides, but let me take you to the last one, and my contact information's there. So feel free to write that down and reach out. Probably best to email me to start, and then we could set up some time to speak. Bruce, with regards to adapting technical training, I think with technical training, you're always going to be looking at probably a blend as your best solution. There are absolutely aspects of technical training that can be done virtually, but I'm not so sure everything. It really depends, but I wouldn't dismiss it right away. I would give it a shot.
Megs, Dave has a question right above that too. Would a participant guide increase participation in all types of online programs, including webinars, at least an outline?
I think so. Is it necessary for a webinar? Maybe for a webinar, I would say have them be able to download something after the fact. Let them listen to the message that you're delivering, but maybe then have them download a white paper or whatever it is that you just delivered in webinar form, let them be able to take away with them. I like participant guides. I like the opportunity to take notes. I like to have something to go back to later to reference. You know, you might not always remember what you learned, but hopefully you remember that you learned something about that topic, and you just need to know where to go back to find it. So I like a participant guide. Can I say that, yes, it absolutely, you know, it increases learning or is a benefit? No, and maybe there have been studies done that say so one way or another. I just find them to be hugely beneficial, especially as a place to capture also those instructions that you want your learner to have with regards to how to do any of the exercises or activities that you've built into your session. All right, what else? Do we have other questions here? Let's see. Bobby, do we have any other questions that I should be addressing?
No, I think
we're
okay.
good?
Does anybody have any other questions? Any other questions for Margaret or myself?
It looks like Michelle has her hand up, and is that from before, Michelle? Oh, okay. Well, hopefully I answered your question, whatever it was.
Margaret, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I thought we were at the end, but
No, it's fine. It was 1 o'clock. It's fine.
Great job. Great material. All right, folks.
Well, good.
If nobody has any questions here, we're going to sign off, and hopefully we will see you again in May for training versus education.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Bobby, for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Well, I will talk to you. I will talk to
All
you
right.
afterwards. Have a great time.
Down.
Bye.
All right, thanks. Bye.